can then better understand how weight gain and weight loss happen from a psychological perspective. And finally, how we can then start to, by understanding these factors, then develop non-weight related targets that we can work on and develop a treatment protocol based around. So to start off with, why weight isn't the problem. So Kira's kind of touched on already that we know a lot of the factors to do with obesity and physical health. But there's also a lot of factors that come into play when we look at obesity and psychological well-being as well. So lots of us will be aware that obesity is linked to increased rates of depression, it's linked to increased rates of anxiety, poorer work functioning, lower self-esteem, all of these different factors. However, really what I want to emphasize is that just because these factors are linked, as Kira's already touched on, that does not mean that obesity equals or causes that poorer psychological well-being. So, I'm going to start off with saying what some of the research tells us. Now, you may notice that I'm saying research, but my heading says researchers. And you'll kind of see why I'm making that emphasis between researchers and research, because there can be little biases that slip through, and I kind of want to illustrate that in some of the research. So researchers would have us believe that weight loss leads to improved well-being or causes improved well-being. Researchers would have us believe that childhood obesity causes heightened externalizing and internalizing difficulties. Researchers would have us believe that obesity leads to reduced levels of happiness and lower subjective well-being. But let's actually evaluate what some of those studies that I've just mentioned are really saying. So one of the examples of a great study that showed us that weight loss interventions are fantastic and weight loss leads to all of these amazing things, offered people 3 free personal training sessions a week, and then they got better. And this is one of the interesting things about all of these weight loss intervention studies, is when we look at it, how does the weight loss actually occur? And can we actually attribute any of the improvements in subjective well-being, happiness, whatever the resilience or outcome measure is, to the obesity and the weight loss? Or could it be the increases in physical activity or the healthy eating that that person is doing? And how do we actually differentiate this? There was one really amazing meta-analysis that happened recently, and they looked at weight loss interventions and, again, how weight loss interventions affected depression. The great thing about it is the entire meta-analysis showed that none of the weight loss interventions actually affected anyone's weight. There was little to no effect on anyone's weight. But regardless of those weight loss interventions targeting weight loss, essentially all of the effects said that we then saw reductions in depression and improvements in self-esteem in those populations. Yet again, going back to what researchers say, the article then said, oh, so give them weight loss interventions and that will improve their self-esteem and depression. Not, let's get them exercising, let's get them moving, let's get them eating healthier, let's get them behaviourally activated, whatever else we're targeting with our weight loss interventions. And that is what causes the depression and self-esteem. Coming back to the second half of all of those links and correlations that I was mentioning, there's an overwhelming amount of studies and a really extensive review looked at all of the links between obesity and these other things that we're correlating it to quite often don't actually measure a lot of the other factors that may be causing it. So is obesity causing reduced happiness, heightened externalizing and internalizing difficulties, lower subjective well-being? Or again, as Kira mentioned, are all of these potentially outcomes of low SES? Insufficient nutrient consumption? Are they an aspect of psychological well-being, health functioning, fitness levels, engagement in exercise? And again, it doesn't matter. So there has been some studies, more recently, fantastically, that do start catering for some of these factors. And we can then start making much more successful links. One of those links, and these have been done in huge epidemiological studies with between 14 and 68,000 people. So if you're going to find an effect in any population, it's going to be in that size. And what do they find? The BMI actually does not relate to psychological distress. BMI does not actually predict resilience. Healthy food behaviours produce resilience. Increased vegetable intake, increased food intake, decreased levels of sugar consumption, increased physical activity, they link to resilience. But BMI category doesn't help. After catering for the amount of physical activity that people are doing, BMI doesn't even predict positive self-worth. So all of these things that we were suggesting that BMI and obesity and overweight is responsible for in our earlier slides, once we start doing effective research and honest research, we start to see that those links start disappearing, magically, of course. Interestingly, one meta-analysis that looked at a whole range of longitudinal studies with depression actually showed that it was the decreased psychological well-being in participants that preceded the weight gain and the poorer eating behaviours. So again, coming back to that idea of the chicken and the egg that Kira was mentioning, was it really the obesity that happened first, or was it the decreases in psychological functioning that happened? They also showed with this study, that depression and anxiety increased some of the HDL cholesterol levels as well as waist circumference. So the anxiety and depression are having these other range of physical impacts that we're starting to blame on obesity as well. So now that hopefully I've started to raise some questions in your mind, if not get some solidified followers on board about weight loss not being the problem or weight not being the problem, I want to address why emphasising weight loss isn't the answer. Now, Kira's already touched on the fact that yes, 95% of diets fail. Pretty much 50% of us give up within 2 months of actually starting a diet. For me, it's like 1 to 2 weeks. I see a chocolate cake and I'm like, hello, I heart brownies, I am in. And essentially, one of the reasons that we not only see that those people, or me, fail at our diets, but also start regaining weight, one of the medical hypotheses is that by engaging in dieting behaviour, we start off a permanent deceleration of our basal metabolic rate. Our whole starvation, everything kicks into gear, we want to stay at homeostasis, all that kind of stuff. But what they've actually found is that one doesn't work so much when we start to actually break it down, especially with people who engage in cyclical dieting. So a second hypothesis of why we start regaining all of that weight is what Kate's going to discuss in her speech a little later on, and it's called the forbidden apple effect, or Kate's going to discuss it as the forbidden chocolate cake effect, which, as I mentioned, is, oh my goodness, that food is so bad, I really want it, oh my goodness, get to eat it anyway. And then, of course, we fail at our diet, all or nothing comes in, and it's just a big mess of me ending up with a lot of Ben and Jerry's in my mouth. But what I want to discuss is hypothesis 3. Hypothesis 3 is the idea that, again, as Kira's touched on, it's actually the dieting that precipitates a lot of the negative psychological outcomes itself, the focus on weight that precipitates a lot of those negative psychological outcomes themselves, that then leads to future weight gain, future obesity, and future difficulties with our mental and physical health. Could have had a major's last for that everyone, but it's saved. Didn't knock the laptop off. Okay, so how does this actually work? So essentially, what I want you to notice is that what I'm talking about here is our bit of predictor is encouraging individuals to diet. Now, the reason I want to highlight this is this is not actually even people engaging in diets yet that have these effects. This is just, friendly parents saying, oh, I'm looking a bit pudgy there, I ate too much Christmas cake, whatever it might be. Maybe got to work off that. One of the friends saying, oh, your clothes are looking a little bit tight, have you thought about going to the gym lately? Or, again, some kind of health professional kind of pushing us towards maybe some of those issues wouldn't be so intense if you lost some weight. So just each of those different areas of encouragement is our predictor. Now, the first thing that we know that it predicts is actually when we encourage individuals to diet, they then begin having higher perceptions of themselves as overweight in comparison to people that haven't been encouraged to diet. They also experience higher levels of body dissatisfaction. Now, we may kind of break that one down and sort of say, but maybe we're just telling all the overweight people to diet. However, what we actually found in this study was that it was regardless of actual BMI factors, family factors, and any psychological factors that caused or was correlated with the encouraging individuals to diet and the high perceptions of being overweight and obese and body dissatisfaction. Additionally, we're kind of trying to be helpful by suggesting people diet again. Our ultimate goal is to get them to a healthier way, have less physical health issues, have less psychological issues. But encouraging individuals to diet actually leads to higher levels of disordered eating behaviours, further levels of restriction, higher levels of binging, diet pill use, and laxative use. So again, we're kind of getting further away from what we're trying to achieve by encouraging someone to diet. I'm going to pop over this side to, again, our psychological factors, and that's where I'm really emphasising. And encouraging individuals to diet actually decreases their self-esteem and increases depressive symptoms as well. One really interesting study did exactly the opposite, and it had peers tell their friends, you don't need to go on a diet, don't worry about it, it's just useless, giving them discouraging messages about dieting. That would be awkward. Yes, please don't die. And then we saw everyone's psychological well-being increase, which is actually what happened in the study as well. When friends told friends negative messages about dieting and discouraged them from doing it, that alone increased their psychological well-being at the time. Now, I've left this one to last because, again, BMI, weight loss is kind of what we're trying to target here. Yet, when we're encouraging people to diet, we actually find that ends up, probably mostly through that disordered eating and higher levels of body dissatisfaction, to lead to higher categories of BMI and increases in weight. So, realistically, we're kind of achieving everything exactly the opposite of what we want to be. So, what I want to do is try to flesh this out a little bit further and try and figure out why this is happening. So initially we do have that weight-shaped preoccupation wherein we're encouraging people to diet. Again, building this idea of if they just lost weight, then things will be okay. And this leads to increased levels of body dissatisfaction. Now, when we're dissatisfied with our body, we engage in higher levels of social comparison. And I'm not sure how many people are aware, but I think it was about 2 days ago, the Victoria's Secret models all did their beautiful show for the year. And when we're looking at social comparison, it's usually not the average person on the street that we engage in social comparison with. It's the Gigi Hadid, it's the Kendall Jenner, all of those kind of slimmer people. And of course, when we're really idolising those unrealistic standards and then comparing that to ourselves, we're going to be led to lower self-esteem. Lower self-esteem then in turn leads to more negative affect, higher incidences of depression, anxiety and stress levels. And in combination with having any kind of poor emotional regulation skills, this is going to lead to our disordered eating behaviour that we've touched on earlier. So how does this then lead to further weight gain? Well, as Kate's going to touch on in our dietetic speech, when we increase our restraint, when we engage with these unhealthy behaviours, understandably, we're either going to put on weight at some point or we're going to mess up and eat the chocolate cake at some point. And then that's going to increase our levels of distress because essentially we've failed and then experienced decreased self-efficacy. We also engage in decreased levels of health behaviours, and that overall just continues to decrease our overall levels of mental health. So if weight loss isn't the answer, let's try and understand why it's not the answer. So essentially there is a whole range of reasons that people overeat. And when we tell them to eat less and exercise more, we're actually missing the entire point because there's a reason that they're engaging with these behaviours. Now, not every single person that is overweight or overeating has every single one of these issues or underlying symptoms, underlying causes to their overeating. However, there's likely that there's at least some of them or that there's something going on in general. Now, we wouldn't just take away someone's drug use or take away someone's cigarette use or any of those other factors, any other addiction, without putting in place some other coping strategies because it's just not going to be effective. There's a reason that we use drugs and there's a reason that we overeat. So if we're trying to implement effective interventions, we need to start addressing why these people are overeating, not engaging in exercise, and essentially why these behaviours just aren't working for them. The other part of why weight preoccupation doesn't work I think is summed up really nicely by this picture. So this is one from actually a more pro-Anna website. that says when you are thin, you can do whatever you want and everyone will love you. Now, when we have clients that are anorexic or have bulimia or on any other end of that skinny spectrum, we say to them how dysfunctional these beliefs are. We work on challenging them, we work on building their self-worth internally. So why do we tell this to people who are overweight and obese? Why is it okay for us to tell them that if you were thinner, if you were healthier, if you were doing all of these things, then your life would be better? Because does weight loss really equal happiness? So if not weight loss, what on earth do we do? So again, it comes back to that idea that weight loss or obesity isn't the problem. There is obviously something that's underlying both of these factors, and if we can figure out some information about that, again, it's going to be individual person to person, but then we can start to do things about helping this person improve their psychological well-being. Now, some of the key factors that we do look at in psychological intervention are weight shape replication, body dissatisfaction, poor emotion regulation skills, and ineffective interpersonal and problem-solving skills. Now, obviously I've already touched on weight shape replication. We know that it leads to increased levels of disordered eating. We know that it equals higher levels of body dissatisfaction. So essentially, we really want to address that one at some point if we're doing any kind of psychological treatment. We've already touched on body dissatisfaction as well. And essentially, it makes sense for people that are overweight to be dissatisfied with their body and for us to continue trying to help them. When we look at people that are overweight, we make so many attributions about why those people are overweight. Whether they're lazy, whether they're unintelligent, all of those different kinds of things are constant comments and stigma that surrounds people that are overweight. Yet somehow we think by telling them that they're overweight and that's bad and wrong, that that's going to promote healthy behaviours. Essentially, with poor emotion regulation skills, when people are overeaters or when people experience higher levels of stress, it is very difficult for them to feel in control of their eating, to be able to listen to their hunger and fullness cues. And one thing that we can do to change that is work on their emotion regulation skills, as I'm going to go through on our next slide. Additionally, while emotion regulation skills make us feel more in control of our internal experience by managing our anxiety, our sadness, our stress levels, when we look at our interpersonal and problem-solving skills, having that set of skills helps us feel more in control of our external environment. So how do we actually address these? Well, rather than having that weight shape preoccupation, what we really want to start encouraging clients to do is to have an increased connectedness to their values. So rather than having weight held up on this pillar that if I was just thinner, then my life would be good, then everything would be good, then I would have a partner, then I would have a job, then I would have ... that's successful. We want to try and focus on the other things that people can do to bring meaning and value from their life. Interestingly, the disordered eating behaviours they might be engaging in are often in conflict with a lot of those values, especially when we look at ones in terms of having healthy life, having balance, having self-care and self-compassion. I often say to clients, if they had supportive relationships or could develop and foster supportive relationships, if they were able to feel that sense of achievement from their job or their education, whatever their life's purpose is, if they were able to be giving that time for their own self-care, have that balance, whatever else it might be, and their weight didn't change, would they still be happy? And usually the answer really comes with a lot of pushing. Initially they're like, no, have to lose weight. But with that bit of pushing, yeah, because they recognise those things are the things that have meaning to our life. And realistically, when we're living those things, we are engaging in more health behaviours because that's that part of looking after ourselves. Rather than focusing on body dissatisfaction, what we do try and do from a psychological perspective is try and encourage people to really look at the sum of their internal and external characteristics. So rather than focusing all of their self-worth and the way that they look, punishing themselves for that, or feeling success when they get told that they look great, or scale, whatever it might be, we try to encourage fostering that self-acceptance. I don't like saying huge amounts of self-esteem or self-love or anything like that, because I often find that that's really unachievable for a lot of clients who've been constantly chastising themselves, but just to be able to foster that acceptance of themselves. I've set up that learning to care for ourselves leads to engaging in caring behaviours, and essentially that's exactly the way that it works. If we're dissatisfied with our body, if we engage in that self-loathing, why would we take care of ourselves? But if we can start to foster that self-acceptance, start to foster just some self-care, some self-compassion, some self-kindness, then we're more likely to be able to engage in caring behaviours. In terms of emotion regulation strategies, we want to encourage people to have skills to be able to experience and express emotions more effectively. As I said, if we're more in control of our internal experiences, we don't need to control our food. We don't need to fall into that control, restrict, binge relationship that many people do have with food. And again, when we're using maladaptive behaviour strategies such as continually emotional eating, we don't have time for the adaptive strategies, so we want to flip that around. The more we're engaging in adaptive healthy behaviours and adaptive coping strategies, the more that we can reduce those maladaptive coping strategies as well. Lastly, as I've touched on, whilst our improving emotion regulation is our internal experiences that we're managing more effectively, increasing effectiveness with skills such as assertiveness, communication skills, social skills, problem solving, and committed actions towards our values, what we're looking at doing is providing people with those skills so they feel more in control of their environment instead. So once we have that control, we again don't need to use the maladaptive coping strategies of emotional eating to really as a self-soothing behaviour. So I want to come back to those questions that I asked at the start. Why weight isn't the problem? Why emphasising weight loss isn't the answer? Understanding weight gain and loss, and developing non-weight related strategies and targets. And hopefully I've helped some of you to at least accept or question these ideas with some of these key messages. That obesity does not equal poor psychological well-being. And in isolation, cannot solely predict any kind of psychological well-being. With focusing on weight loss and encouraging our clients to focus on their weight loss leads to poorer physical and psychological outcomes, as the other girls will be going on with a little bit more detail as well. And finally, if we can really start to use clinical approaches that, rather than focusing on weight loss, address the underlying psychological and underlying other areas of mechanisms, rather than just eat less, exercise more, hopefully we'll be able to develop a more sustainable model of psychological well-being, physical well-being, and then, maybe as an offset, their weight will change. So I'm just going to introduce you to Kate now, who's going to be coming from our dietitian perspective.